Last time we left off with the road to Texas, talking about the Texas-Mexican War and a little bit of the characters in that: Sam Houston, Santa Anna, David Crockett, uh, James Bowie, all sorts of interesting individuals. And now we are on to the Mexican War. The annexation of Texas in 1845 did not satisfy the Americans. They were already looking towards California, still in Mexican possession. Polk's administration offered to buy the whole Southwest, but Mexican pride, wounded by the Texas affair, caused them to refuse. A boundary dispute between Texas and Mexico led to some fighting. Polk thereupon declared that American blood has been shed on American soil, which uh, rather begged the question, was it American soil? The war which followed, 1846 to 1848, was brief and one-sided. Although the United States had vastly superior number and resources, had the Mexicans been united, they might have prolonged the struggle, owing to the rugged and mountainous character of the country. Two generals, Winfield Scott, nicknamed Old Fuss and Feathers, from his concern for military forms, and Zachary Taylor, nicknamed Old Rough and Ready, from his neglect of such forms, carried the American forces to victory. Unfortunately for the Polk administration, both generals were Whigs, and Taylor was elected to president in 1848. It is interesting to note that many of the officers on both sides of the Civil War had received their baptism of fire in the Mexican conflict. Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant both served, and John Fremont effected a diversion in California. By the Treaty of 1848, the United States annexed the area now consisting of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and small parts of Colorado and Wyoming. In partial compensation, Mexico was awarded $15 million. A few years later, there was a small additional purchase to facilitate a southern railroad route. The Gadsden Purchase completed the territory of the continental United States. Subsequent annexations were separated from the rest of the country by sea, Hawaii, or by Canada, Alaska. The story of the Mormons in Utah is a unique chapter in American history. Joseph Smith professed to find in the Book of Mormon a new revelation. His followers were driven out of the eastern and middle western states, partly because of their religious tenets, but mainly because they allowed the practice of polygamy. In 1847, Brigham Young led them to the region of the Great Salt Lake in what is now Utah, but was then called Deseret. Here, the Latter-day Saints, as they called themselves, or Mormons, as the rest of the world called them, established a wilderness Zion, strictly and almost autocratically disciplined. It became a thriving agricultural community, and for a time kept out the non-Mormon or Gentiles. Yeah, so the Mexican War, there's quite a few pictures here that we'll get into in a few minutes, but Mexican War, very interesting war. Polk kind of led his campaign on this. Polk is the only president that we will ever have that will fully live up to his campaign promises. Um, Said he was going to do something, he did it, and then he was done, and that was it. Um, yeah, loses to Zachary Taylor, um, who isn't really president for all that long. Um, Winfield Scott, interestingly, also tried to run for president, lost to Taylor, and then just it never worked out. But he will be in charge actually for quite a while. Actually, Winfield Scott will technically be in charge of all United States forces at the start of the Civil War and kind of through it as well. He will be technically the one in charge. Now, he doesn't really do anything. By that point, he's just way too old. But he is in charge. And yeah, a lot of the generals that they talked about, so Robert E. Lee and Grant and quite a few others that participated in the Mexican-American War, said it was pretty much a pointless war. Everyone kind of agreed it was pointless. It shouldn't have happened. No one really liked it. But it still happened nonetheless. Uh, and yeah, Mexico's given the consolatory prize of $15 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but really isn't. It's just not a lot. Um, it's really unfortunate for the Mexicans. They tried to fight very hard, but some poor leadership and, like they said, division really uh, interrupted any chance that they would have really had at a strong struggle. Unfortunately for them. But now we'll get on to the pictures. So at the left here, Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States. That's Zachary Taylor there. Interesting feller. Um, like all the presidents of this time, doesn't really help with slavery. Doesn't. So everyone kind of knew a civil war was coming. None of the presidents before the Civil War really do anything of great note for it. So, and he is, of course, one of them. But yeah. And above here is the United States Army on the march to the Mexican War. War had been declared when President Polk put the blame on Mexico for fighting that had broken out between Mexicans and General Taylor's troops along the border in May 1846. The war lasted until the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the 2nd of February, 1848, in which Mexico agreed that the border between the countries would be the Rio Grande, and ceded New Mexico and California, as well as the land that lay between them, to the United States. In turn, the United States government paid the Mexican government $15 million. Yeah, so I will say one thing that never really made sense when you're looking at a map. I'm sure some people have seen it. There are uh, Mexico, if you look at the nation, it's obviously the big triangle, kind of, on the map. It's more than a triangle, but, general shape. But then there's a little part south of California, and that's Baja California. One part that never really made sense, and I'm sure people at the time probably, I mean, I know the reasoning why, but they that is also never annexed, and so it leaves a really weird border on the map. Reason is it's just not good land. Just realistically, it's not good land. People didn't want it, but it is interesting to think that it was never um, taken. You'd think they would, but hey, you know what? They didn't. So, but just interesting, nonetheless. Okay, at the left here is General Winfield Scott at Veracruz, Mexico. President Polk had decided to open a second front in Mexico. In addition to the one along the Texas border, he sent Scott and his expeditionary force from New Orleans to Veracruz. With his army of 10,000 men, Scott headed west from Veracruz towards Mexico City. When he reached Cerro Gordo, Santa Anna attacked on the 17th to 18th of April, 1847, and was soundly defeated. Scott then took Jalapa and Puebla. Is it Jalapa or Jalapa? Not sure. And Puebla. When Scott and his troops reached Mexico City, Santa Anna attacked again and was defeated again. Scott then won a succession of victories. Contreras, the 19th of August. Churubusco, the 20th of August. Molino del Rey, the 8th of September. And Chapultepec, I think it's how it's pronounced, the 13th of September. On the 14th of September, 1847, The Americans had captured the Mexican capital city. Yeah, Winfield Scott, a very acclaimed general, very decent general. Um, that's why he's in charge for as long as he is. He is a really good general, and he kind of gets forgotten about in American history a lot of the times. But he really is a very, very good general. Think about it. Mexico, they're in home territory. Um, and Winfield Scott just kind of runs roughshod all over them. And there's not really much they can do about it. And Winfield Scott also, in a lot of other instances, had cool leadership. He had a cool head. Knew when to do the things the right way and things like that. He'll actually help a dispute that almost caused the United States and Britain to go to war. He prevented that. Very, very intelligent man, but forgotten about a lot of times. Very unfortunate. Um, and above, right here, General Zachary Taylor had been invading Mexico from the north. Old Rough and Ready captured Matamoros, and then with a handful of regulars and several thousand volunteers, he began his siege of Monterrey. Yeah. After 3 days of hard fighting, 21st of September to 23rd of September, he captured the city. Yeah, Zachary Taylor also very very good general. That's why he gets elected president. Realistically, Zachary Taylor's more. Mm, you can get along with him a little bit more, probably, than Mr. Winfield Scott over there. Winfield Scott, like they said, very prom and proper. He follows the rules of certain things and things like that. But Zachary Taylor's more of like everyman kind of thing. That's kind of why people like him a little bit more. As good, is he better than Winfield Scott? Hard to say. I wonder if they ever had the an argument about it. Probably. At the right here, General Winfield Scott entering Mexico City in triumph. And you can see Scott on a white horse. You know, it's very interesting. You can see the view of everyone looking at him. Just interesting. Interesting fella, to say the least. So at the left here is Brigham Young, or Brigham Young? Mormon prophet Joseph Smith's second in command, decided that it would be best if the Mormons left Illinois and headed west. Realistically, it was. People did not like the Mormons very much. Obviously, like they said, for polygamy is one reason, but also Mormons tend to, especially in the earlier times, they're very strict in their beliefs. A lot of people are, but it can cause friction. Kind of a lot like the Puritans that we talked about in earlier parts of this book. So they're a lot like the Puritans in that regard, where they are very strict with their beliefs, and so it rubs people the wrong way. So yeah, them going to Utah or in the Great Salt Lake probably was the best for them, just realistically. At the above picture here, this they did in 1846. About 15,000 of them left their homes, crossed through Iowa to the Council Bluffs area. Yeah, 15,000, that's quite a few people, obviously. That's why when they settle, they really have a easier time settling. Great Salt Lake, uh, it's an alright area to settle. They make it very, very good, and they kind of prosper for quite a while. However, it does lead to where Utah is today, where it still has very much a strong Mormon identity. Nothing wrong with that, but it just is very strong there. And you can see it in laws and things like that. It's one of those states that's very hard to change because Mormons are so entrenched into it. Very interesting place, though. Very beautiful place, actually. If you ever can visit the Great Salt Lake, you really should. At the opposite top here, in 1847, Young and a small group of his followers pushed west across the plains over the mountains and finally reached the Great Salt Lake. Two larger groups followed them, reaching the lake by autumn. Yeah, a lot of times when you want to settle, have a smaller group go first just to get the rough idea. They can start clearing the area, things like that, making sure it's a good place to live. Then you have the bigger groups showing up a little bit after. Um, Always a good idea. I mean, just with any settlement plans, get things started with a smaller group, then have the bigger groups move in, typically. At the bottom here, there they built their city, Salt Lake City. By 1850, more than 11,000 Mormons were living in the Great Salt Lake Valley. By the time they had the Transcontinental Railroad, or by the time that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, there were 60,000 Mormons there. And Salt Lake City, very big city today, still very big city, very interesting city. You can see this painting, it looks like. 60,000 people in a city. I mean, it's not the biggest city in the world by any means, but it's still a very large city nonetheless. 60,000 people, quite a lot. Even today, 60,000 is a decent sized city. Not the largest cities, of course. You have places like New York and London and Chicago and things like that. But this was over 100 years ago, so about 170 years ago or so. So very interesting. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways you can improve these videos, leave a comment down below. I always appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.